Hello, I'm Tony Millward, and this is part 2 of my interview with top recording engineer and producer Stuart Epps.
I've done everything, been on tour with Kiki, I've fallen in love with a girl who lived in an ice cream van in Hawaii, and I thought, that's for me. So I went to see Gus, told him I'm leaving. He said, oh dear, that's a shame. I'm building a studio, I'm buying this place in Cookham. Anything that Gus did is going to be good. So I said, I'm with you, I'm coming on board. The last Zeppelin album was the first thing I did with Jimmy.
Yeah.
And he's an amazing producer, really. He's a very intelligent guy. Did the Coda album, we did Death Wish 2, which was a pretty amazing project as well. And then we did The Firm, which was definitely an amazing project with Paul Rodgers. I was going to write a book called Trouble at Mill. There's definitely a curse on that place.
Do you really believe it's haunted?
Yes. I brought him to the fucking mill. Yeah. Now he's kicking me out. Yeah, so we had a good row about that, but he's a fucking great big bully, he is. Where is he?
I mean, I was just wondering about
Go on.
the mill.
Ah, the mill, right. 1974, I decided to retire. I'd done everything, been on tour with Kiki, I'd fallen in love with a girl who lived in an ice cream van in Hawaii, and I thought, that's for me. I'd done everything, been everywhere, seen it all. I'm now 23, getting well old, time to retire. So I thought, right, and anyway, things at Rocket weren't great. John Reed had just fired Kiki's band, Roger Pope, because Elton wanted him for his band, and Steve Brown had left. He'd left, and I didn't get on with John particularly well at all. Tried to strangle me once, and that was the least of the problems.
Nice.
And kept telling me to fuck off. It must have been him.
I think it could well have been, yeah.
But anyway, but he didn't smoke a cigar. That wouldn't have suited him. But anyway, so I thought I'll go around and say goodbye to everyone. I'll take Elton out for a meal, because they've always been nice to me and all that. And then I'm off to Hawaii. So I went to see Gus, who was up in Rockfield, a great studio up in Rockfield, making an album. He was making an album with a band called Solution for Rocket Records. Anyway, I told him I'm leaving. He said, oh dear, that's a shame. He said, anyway, I'm building a studio. I'm buying this place in Cookham. Cookham, I used to go there when I was a kid. I loved Cookham. He said, well, go and look at it. Go and look at the place that I've bought. Anyway, always remember that. Had a Austin Healey Sprite wobbling down the M4, came off the M4, exit 7, go down to this amazing, admittedly broken down property, but beautiful place by the river, and Cookham's amazing, and I just thought, wow, this is great. And if whatever Gus does, it's got to be good. And he's talking about building, and I hadn't worked in a studio for years, but anything that Gus did is going to be good. Yeah. So I said, I'm with you, I'm coming on board. So we met, and he's going to pay me £60 a week, and I'm going to leave home, because I was still at my parents'. This is after this big tour with Kiki. And so this was now embarking on building this studio down Mill Lane, not a mile from here. And it wasn't supposed to take as long as it did. It took 2 years to build. It was an incredible building project, all-encompassing. Loved it to bits. I rented a cottage in the high street, which was costing me £40 a week, and I'm getting £60 a week. And I was only telling this story to someone the other day. I'd never been shopping before. I've been living with my parents. I went to the shop, and a tin of baked beans, it says £3. And I don't know, cornflakes, £6 or something. And I thought, I've had it. So 2 tin of baked beans and a box of cornflakes for a week, and now I'm at it. Anyway, it was a cash and carry. I didn't know what a cash and carry was. That was for a dozen tins. But anyway, I love Cookham, took to it incredibly well, and then we built this, eventually, unbelievable studio, the best studio on the planet, certainly the most expensive one, cost £1 million. 1974, Gus went totally mad, only the best. He did it like one of Elton's productions, nothing was, and the idea initially was to build it to remix Elton's albums in quadraphonic, which was the thing of the time.
Yeah.
Quadraphonic didn't really take off, but it was also for Gus to now sign up new artists to experiment. And actually, I wasn't the engineer when the mill was built. The engineer was Phil Dunn, who had mixed all Elton's albums with Gus. I was the assistant, living there, looking after the place, the cleaner, the this, that, and the other. But it was an amazing start. Young guy came along from Middlesbrough. We got really friendly. He was a nice bloke. I really liked his songs. That's Chris Rea. We did an album with a band called Voyager.
Great band.
Yeah, great band.
Halfway Hotel.
Yeah, I'm still mates with them. I still use the keyboard player, Paul Hirsch.
Really?
He's often here. He's still a brilliant musician. And Paul French. Yeah. In fact, I'm friends with all of them, Chris Hook. And, well, we did some great stuff. We did, what's that band? Oh, blimey.
Lindisfarne?
Lindisfarne. Thanks very much. You read my mind. Run for Home, we did that. Yep. The only problem was that Gus, and then on the second Chris Rea album, Phil Dunn was always interested in doing something else because Gus used to take forever. So I started sitting in the engineer's chair instead of the assistant engineer's chair. And because I love Gus's productions, and we got on like brilliantly anyway. I love Gus. And so I now became Gus's engineer on that, because I said, this is, I want to do the whole album, not just come in on the end. So me and Gus were now like a team, engineer, producer at the mill, which was totally amazing. The only drag was that he was keeping awake,
Long hours.
Oh, ridiculous hours. 18 hours a day.
Wow.
Crazy. You didn't know if it was getting light, getting dark, it was all that stuff.
So what was the learning curve? I mean, you had an amazing 42-channel mixing desk, which was big at the time, and MCI, wasn't it?
MCI, 40-channel desk.
And all their reel-to-reels as well.
I mean, and Gus, when the equipment was bought then, 4 echo plates instead of 1. I mean, whatever the technology, whatever the height of technology was then, we had it at the mill. So apart from microphones, which were still the best ones, were still the ancient, 67s and 47s or whatever. Yeah. But we had everything there all the time. I mean, and now, I obviously went to a lot of recording sessions while I was responsible in finding, the studio in France, where the chateau, where the Yellow Brick Road was made and all that. Yeah. But I never spent hours and hours with Gus in the studio. You'd probably just go at the end of a session or be there for a couple of hours having a joint and listening to the new album.
I think that's where he was inspired to get one of those desks, wasn't it? The chateau?
It was, absolutely, yeah. There's a story behind that, because he went to, I'm not sure, it probably was the chateau actually, and the story is that, because Gus was an amazing storyteller, so everything that he experienced, if it was something a bit whatever, there'd be a 2-hour story. Anyway, the story is that he was in the studio where the musicians are, the studio part, listening to a band, and then he walked into the control room and he said it was the same sound. And although that sounds mad, well, of course it's the same sound. In those days, like with Decca or Abbey Road, all these big studios, when you went in the control room, it was all this like different noise, with reverbs and so. And he just said, "What desk is that?" And they said MCI. But the thing is, as I say, Gus never did anything by halves, and so he didn't want the off-the-shelf MCI. He wanted to design it himself. He wanted it in his own colours. He crackers, Gus. I mean, amazing. You just don't get people like him anymore. He didn't wear the same clothes as anyone else. He was always outrageously dressed, but very smart. Elton called him the James Bond of the recording industry. You could lance your main artery on those creases. Because he used to iron his socks, Gus.
Really?
Yeah.
And his underpants as well, probably.
I'm not sure about that.
No, I don't suppose you'd ever experience them. But,
I think that might be a bit pushing it a bit. Where would you put the crease?
Well, exactly.
You'd have loved Gus. Well, everyone loved Gus, really.
Yeah, so
but if you're
into perfectionist,
music,
flamboyant.
Yeah, totally amazing. I mean, his house in Cobham was just my favourite house of all time. He probably spent $5 million on that, and it wasn't a castle, but every little area. All right, I'll tell you one story about the mill, which is a good one.
Yeah.
To show Gus's
fastidiousness.
Thank you. And immaculate, whatever. Right. So the control room, it's all being built. I mean, it's just having the most. The guy that was the architect was a guy called Eddie Veal, who did that house next to your guy that you met. He did Lennon's house. He did Ringo's studio. He did George's studio. You know, Eddie Veal, an amazing architect. And so they built this, all of that, and they're forming the control room. Anyway, this day they're putting this, because it was the mid-70s, so everything was dark brown and all that, thick pile carpet. Anyway, they're putting this material up on the walls, which is beautiful. It's like a brown, it's like suede, it's like, it probably was suede. No, it was probably leather, I don't know, actually, it was suede. Putting it all over the control room looked fucking amazing. Beautiful, with all the paneling between it and all that. I spent weeks on it. Anyway, Gus only used to, because he'd be on tour or he'd be somewhere or other making an album. So Gus popped in and he's looking around at what they're doing and all that. And he walks in the control room and he goes, "Oh yeah." He said, don't think that's not the right colour. Going, what are you talking about? Yeah, he says, "That's not the right colour." He goes into his pocket and pulls out what we used to call a swatch. Yeah, look, pulls out a swatch.
Oh yeah, like a colour sample.
Just happens to have it in it. So he puts it up against the wall like that.
Yeah.
And to our amazement, it isn't the same colour.
Ah.
And he's going, yeah, not the same colour.
Right.
What the fuck? Anyway, Eddie Veal comes along, gets the swatch, goes like that. Now it's the same colour.
Ah, so it's the way the light was falling on it. Or...
And, immediately Gus says, "Oh, there you go, you've hung it upside down." And then this ridiculous conversation takes place. Which way up should it have been hung?
What exactly?
Because it had a pile. It had a pile on it, basically.
Yeah, yeah. So it depends which way you saw it.
One way up, it's dark.
Yeah.
Anyway, you can bet your life it all came off and went up again, and Gus would have paid for it. How many times have I told that story? Hundreds.
Well, I've never heard it before.
But everything Gus did was immaculate, and he would, and yeah, of course, we did the Ice on Fire was the last album. Was Gus got this chance again? Really, was to do another Elton album.
Yeah.
And as far as he was concerned, this was going to be the best Elton album ever made. In which case, it had to take even longer than all the rest. It was going to cost more than all the rest. We did it digitally. It nearly drove me mad. I nearly had a nervous breakdown when my son was being born, and it was murder basically. And but anyway, eventually, this was because Gus had to sell the studio. This was after he'd sold the studio to Jimmy Page.
So was it not making enough money?
It made a lot of money for Gus, but it didn't make enough money to pay back the tax man who Gus now owed £1 million to or something. Because his accountant, who was a bit of a naughty man who had been juggling Queen's money and Gus's money and all that, wasn't paying the tax man basically, because Gus kept spending it, you see. So the accountant, I think, was thinking, "I'll pay the tax man with the next royalty statement," and the royalty statements went down. So eventually Gus had to sell the mill, he had to sell the studio, and that was when Jimmy bought it, and then I started working for Jimmy.
Yeah.
Which was a pretty amazing time as well, really.
Yeah, because he's quite a character, quite a unusual character as well, isn't he?
Slightly. Very eccentric, yes. Totally eccentric,
Have you got any stories about him?
Yes. Well, I mean...
Tell me one you haven't told anybody else.
Well, that's not likely. Well, no, there's no sort of... he was very shy, very quiet, really, sort of guy. But we did a lot of work. I was working with him for 5 years. Not that in that time we only did we mixed the last Zeppelin album was the first thing I did with Jimmy.
Yeah.
And he's an amazing producer, really. He's a very intelligent guy.
So that was all unreleased material, wasn't it? So
yeah,
you just
all what was left over
and remastered it.
Because I didn't realise, but they had to do another album for Atlantic, and they wanted to get out of their record deal. So it was like, well, actually, that's not why. That was also the reason why he did it, was because Bonham died.
Yeah.
I mean, I was getting ready to record Zeppelin at the Mill and looking forward to it. And then Bonham was found dead at Jimmy's house. That was the end of that. Didn't hear from Jimmy for a while, and then eventually he said, he didn't tell me everything. We didn't sort of discuss like, oh, what are we doing now? You know, things would sort of happen. So this was really a tribute to Bonham.
Yeah.
The Coda album. We were doing this amazing drum track and
like 6 minute.
Yeah, which was the first thing I got to do with Jimmy. And the thing is that he wasn't the easiest guy to understand. You know, I was like, well, are you listening, Jimmy? Come on, you were very out of it at the time. Hello, testing 1, 2, 3. He was very out of it at the time. So, you know, he wasn't easy to work with from that point of view.
Yeah.
But his ideas and what we were doing was all brilliant. And so we did the Coda album. We did Death Wish 2, which was a pretty amazing project as well. And then we did The Firm, which was definitely an amazing project with Paul Rodgers.
Oh, well, it would be.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So I should have had a producer's credit, but didn't go for one. And also, when Jimmy owned the studio, I was now running the whole place. I had no Gus, you know, it's only me doing everything, really, running the whole place. We had a maintenance guy, but and then Phil Carson, who was head of Atlantic Records with Zeppelin and all that, would bring in bands, and he was the one that sent down Twisted Sister, this mad bunch.
Oh yes,
which I ended up producing, and Vandenberg. So actually, from my point of view, I was now getting to do some production, you know, which was great, really. Yeah. And that was it was a great period. Mick Fleetwood with George Harrison, and you know, because Jimmy would obviously tell Bill Wyman, I got the studio, and then I'm working with Bill. So it was a great time, really, that 5 years.
Yeah. Who's Frankie the Fish?
Well, he wasn't Frankie the Fish. He was Frankie Fish.
Oh, just Frankie Fish.
And he's a guy called Dick Graves, which you can imagine you might want to change your name if you're becoming a pop star.
Yeah, to Frankie Fish, obviously.
Well, you might not change it to Frankie Fish unless you were called Elton John. And anyway, Frankie was signed to Rocket as a young lad. He came to Rocket Records. It wasn't me that I don't think I saw him. He was a very good-looking young chap, great voice, great singer, great songwriter, and we took him on. You know, we signed him to Rocket.
Yeah.
And I used to take him to the studio to Denmark Street. We started doing demos, and it was Elton that called him Frankie Fish. Not quite sure why.
Right.
But I told you Elton's sense of humour is pretty mental.
Yeah. But
he died, but he was a great guy, Frankie. He was great. He did change his name.
There's a great website
to Eric
actually.
Fish.
Yeah, that's much more appealing.
Yeah, it's much
Eric
better,
Fish. Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know if you've come across it, but there's a great website called Mill Recording Studios.
Of course I have.
You've seen it, yeah.
Of course.
You're on it.
Of course I am. Well, it was Rod
Duggan.
Rod the Spiod, we used to call him. But Rod Duggan, who put that together, he did that. That's very nice. It's
there's some great pictures.
It's got some great pictures.
Yeah.
Well, the mill's it was down the road. It was the most amazing place. And I used to love showing people around when we were building it. I certainly used to love showing people around when it was built. The problem for me was the work I did with because I also, Chris Rea bought the fucking mill.
Yes.
And owned it for about 10 years.
Did he not lease it for like 2 years from...
No. No, he owned it. When he owned it, he worked in it all the time.
Oh, right. I read that another company bought it and then built Studio 2 and then he leased Studio 2 for like a year or
No,
more.
You've got that kind of round the wrong way. I'll tell you the story.
Oh, go on then.
The story is that... what is the story? Wait a minute. I left the mill. I don't know what year, but I'd had it with Jimmy, to be honest. It was I mean, I probably shouldn't have left actually, but I was getting a lot of freelance. I could see a lot of freelance work and being stuck in the mill, even though I had the run of the mill. But so I left, and funnily enough, I got divorced as well, and then I rented a cottage right next to the mill. Pretty weird, really, but I love living there.
Yeah.
So I was renting this place next door, and meanwhile, Jimmy had sold the studio to these two producers, music guys, sort of business guys. They bought the mill, and they ripped it apart, to be honest. They ripped out all the great equipment, and they put in all modern stuff, and kind of ripped out some of the nice things about it. Anyway, they started running it as a more commercial studio. And they stuck the old desk, the MCI, in what was the garage, and they built Studio 2.
Right.
It was them that built Studio 2.
Yeah.
So at some point, Chris decides to rent Studio 2 because he wants to get more into songwriting and all that. So I heard about this, and I thought, okay, that would be fun.
Yeah.
So I told Chris, how about I'll come and engineer for you at Studio 2? And he went, yeah, great. So we set about doing a year in Studio 2, and God, you're getting some amazing stories out of me.
Good.
All my fucking yesterdays. So while we're actually in there, at some point, one of these guys comes over and says, we've gone bust. The liquidators are coming in. It's all gone tits up. We're off. And so I immediately said to Chris, fucking great, come buy the mill. Come buy it. He went, I don't fucking want it. You buy it. And I should have bought it. But
could you
anyway,
have bought it at the time?
What?
Could you?
No.
You have? Right.
What on what? Chris was paying me hardly. But anyway, so anyway, Chris should have bought the mill. Anyway, so the mill then gets sold to a guy and his wife called Mr. and Mrs. Tweedale, who don't want the studio at all. They sell all the gear. He moves into the house. I can't believe I'm telling this story. Chris says he's going to France because we've all got to get out, I guess. Yeah, we've all got to get out because he's not buying the mill. We've all got to get out. So he says, come on, we're going to France. I said, well, I'm not going to France. I like it here. So he goes to France, loses half his pancreas on the way.
Oh, yeah.
Gets very sick over there, gets ill. He's in France. Meanwhile, I do a deal with Mr. and Mrs. Tweedale to start running, because he hasn't got rid of the gear. The gear's still in Studio 2, the MCI.
Oh, right. So
and
that's
I think,
still
fucking great. I loved it in Studio 2 with Chris, you see. So I said, I did a deal with Tweedale to buy the MCI, and I started running Studio 2 as my studio, my first studio on my own. And it was totally brilliant. I had Bill Wyman coming in there, and Georgie, all sorts of Georgie Fame, and fucking what's his name, Jeff Beck. I mean, this guy used to go for dinner. Tweedale would be out with his. We said, we had Jeff Beck in the house, and they go, yeah, right, I know. And Bill Wyman, I suppose, and Elton John was in there. He goes, yeah, he was.
Yes, as a matter of fact.
Yeah. And anyway, I was having a great time. See, the story's going on too long for you now.
I'm
having a great time.
I'm getting my next question
Chris
prepared.
fucking suddenly comes in, half dead, saying, oh, Stuart made a terrible mistake. I got ill, I got this, that, and the other. I should have bought the mill, shouldn't have left here. Tell him I want to buy it. I said, well, crap. And I was having a great time. Apart from all these people, I'd also been to Brunei and recorded a live album with Elton for this billionaire Brunei chap, and having a great time, making quite a lot of money. It was all going very well. I said, well, Chris, look, he's only just bought the mill. He's doing it up, look. Anyway, so I told Tweedale. He said, no, I don't want to sell it. Anyway, things happened to Tweedale, because to be honest, I think the mill is haunted. It's been given years ago, it was given a sort of a hex with and they've put a what's it on it. What do you call it? Put a something on it so that anyone who has it's going to die or whatever.
Well, like a curse.
Curse!
Yeah.
Why couldn't I think of that word? Curse. Sorry, it was a bit too much level there when I said curse. Have you got a limiter on that?
Say it again quieter.
Curse.
I'll edit it in.
Put a curse on it. No, I was going to write a book called Trouble at Mill. There's definitely a curse on that place.
Do you really believe it's haunted?
Yes.
Did anything happen to you?
Do you know when they say a mill round your neck?
Yeah.
Because they got that from when, I guess, mill owners, you know, they got this big factory, they're paying people fuck all, but one way or another, it used to, I mean, of course, they could have made a lot of money, but I think a lot of mill owners maybe, and somehow, because that was a mill 1,000 years ago, somehow I felt that atmosphere is lingering on, because I saw, well, Gus lost everything on the mill, right? Jimmy Page bought the mill and his fucking drummer dead. You know, I've got a whole list of things, trouble at mill. Gus dies, and his wife, who owned the mill. Tweedale always wanted the mill. A few months later, or maybe it was a year later, his son almost died. His wife can't stand the water noise. He wishes he never bought the mill. So eventually he said, Chris said offer him, it was almost double what the guy paid, and he said, all right, I'll sell it. Chris buys the mill.
Yeah.
The day after he buys the mill, his manager decides to leave him. It's haunted.
It sounds like it might be.
The woman who bought the mill some years ago, her husband died. The people who own the mill now spent a fucking fortune on it, and the wife never gets let out the house as far as I can see. So I think it is haunted one way or another. Got a curse on it. Now, if you look it up, Curse of the Mill, it's actually... You've got me going now, I've got to stop at some point.
So it's back to being residential again?
What happened was, it was owned by a guy who became Lord Mayor of London. The whole family are buried at Cookham Church. They're called the Venables family.
Right.
They owned it when it was a paper mill. Mr. Venables, bit of a lad, when they were doing up Cookham High Street, there's this fucking great big rock at one end of the high street. It's some sort of boundary rock. They had to move it. He said, put that in my garden. You can put that in my garden while you're doing the road. They put it in his garden, they did the road, then they asked for the rock back, and he said, no, you can't have it, I want it. So it is written, I know you're laughing.
Can I have my rock back?
I know you're laughing, but it's written historically that from then on, the villagers put a curse on whoever owned the mill studio. Not the mill studio, the mill. And
so that's why there's a curse on it.
I used to like telling people that who bought the mill, but I would leave it a little while after they bought.
Yeah, wait until they've settled in.
Not before they moved in. Anyway, what was the question?
Well, the next question is, so you move out
You've got.
Oh yeah,
I
was going to ask.
You've got a whole encyclopedia here, let alone a book.
Why was it called The Soul as well? Is that just
It was called The Soul because of... it was at one time owned by Sir Evelyn Delarue. But Sir Evelyn Delarue is part of the Delarue family who were very rich, and they made banknotes for... They're in plastics, but I don't know, they got involved in... They also made fountain pens. I think they might have even invented the fountain pen.
Right.
But Sir Evelyn was a bit of a lad, but he was from Huguenot French descent, and that's why it's called the Sol, S-O-L. Apparently that's Huguenot French.
Yeah, but apparently they weren't allowed to put recorded at the mill on any of the album sleeves because of some planning thing with the local council, and so instead they used to write recorded by moonlight.
Yeah, I mean you've got some of the things right, but not necessarily in the right order. So what it is that I actually think that Gus didn't want to call it the Mill because there was already another studio called the Mill. Okay. So and maybe he thought that was a bit too obvious because, as I say, Gus was quite an unusual guy. So the fact is that I told him probably the house is called the Soul, and he liked that. So we called it the Soul Recording Studios. And someone came up with recording by moonlight because we were fucking always recording by...
Oh, okay. So it's nothing to do with the council building regs and things? Or...
The only thing that's to do with the council, which is part of the story, is that we spent 2 years building the place and got on some of the neighbours' nerves. Right. Because there'd be concrete lorries going up and down every 2 seconds. So in the building of it, Mr. and Mrs. Shellabere, who lived halfway up Mill Lane, got really pissed off. Mrs. Shellabere was a bit of a lawyer, so they decided to spill the beans because they decided that we were building a commercial recording studio.
Right.
And the mill, the studio, the whatever, didn't have commercial planning, right? So suddenly we're going to get closed down. So Gus hired Sherlock Holmes. I mean, the fucking bloke normally does murder cases and stuff, but Gus is a multi-millionaire, so he hires this amazing guy. And we go to court. There was a big court case, and they put up against their fight that we're using it as a commercial studio, and basically we had to prove that it wasn't. It was just Gus's house. It was a music room. In fact, they spent $1 million on it and all this.
Yeah,
and there was only 4 walls left. It was a big music room. Yeah, but anyway, we won the case, and we won limited commercial use. Couldn't use it at weekends, which was a fucking godsend for me. And we won limited commercial use, which probably has run out by now. And so there might have been some sort of local authority thing. Why didn't we? Is that because you were saying why didn't we call it the Mill then, or why it was called Mill? It's a good question.
Yes, I don't.
I think
it
there
was
must have been
accredited.
another studio called the Mill. I think
possibly. Yeah.
And Gus maybe thought it was a bit obvious.
So when you left the Mill, you went on to Alvin Lee's private studio.
What happened was, bastard Chris Rea walked in one day. Oh, because before he bought, he's me and you, Stuart. I'm going to buy the Mill. Oh, it'd be fucking great. You'll be here.
And you did a lot of the backing vocals on his albums as well, didn't you?
Did all the backing vocals on the first album. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm singing on "Fall If You Think It's Over" and the whole album. Yeah, we were good mates. But anyway, cut a long story. So one day, Chris owns the Mill now. I'm paying him rent. He walks in one day. He pretty much says, "You've got to fuck off." He said, "I want this for my accountant." Nice guy, Chris. Thanks a lot. Yeah, my accountant's moving in. You've got to move out.
So I take it you
Thank you very
in touch.
fucking much. I brought him to the fucking Mill.
Yeah.
Now he's kicking me out. Yeah. So we had a good row about that. But he's a fucking great big bully. He is. Where is he? And so now I got to find somewhere for all this fucking gear. And I found Wheeler End, which was Alvin Lee's. Alvin Lee had fled his wife and left, like the Mary Celeste, left this amazing studio. And so I did a deal with his wife, and I moved the MCI in there and started this. It was an amazing studio, Wheeler End, and I was there for a good couple of years, paying rent, wasn't mine and all that. Great studio where I worked with Oasis and Robbie and Mark Owen and Bill Wyman and Paul Weller. The only thing was that although I was doing well, making money, I wasn't charging a fortune, and I always would try and look after them as best I could, and sort of lavish stuff on them, and it was good anyway. What really happened was that Noel had decided he liked it and he wanted it for his studio, so I got kicked out of there as well. I keep getting kicked out. It's in the religion, us Jews, we get kicked out everywhere.
So what happened to the gear?
What happened to the gear was that I sold it to a guy called Adam Francis, who used to run Bray Studios. I should never have sold it. But anyway, I did. So I then moved back to Cookham because I'd been at Wheeler End. I'd been living there.
Where is Wheeler End? Is it far from here?
It's not far. It's just past Marlow, really, on the way to Henley, really, round the back.
Right.
Beautiful little village. And it was a great time. It was great working with Robbie and all these people. I still put it on my CV and all that. Yeah. And it was a great studio. I should never have sold that desk. 42 channel, gorgeous 42 channel MCI desk. So the thing with the Mill is that first of all, it was a concrete box. The whole of the studio was in concrete because it was built next to the river. So they had to put a lot of mass in anyway. There was also a lot of mass to keep the sound out. Gus is... you're kidding me. Can't we do a part 2? The thing with the first day that... Gus had these fucking huge JBLs left and right, bass driver and a top end. You could buy them they're off the shelf really. We had 4 originally for quad. They were fucking enormous. And we had a big Crown 500 watt amp. Anyway, we whopped it up. It was fucking loud. But as I was telling you about the story with the stuff on here, Gus walks in, he puts on a tape, he goes, "That's not loud enough." Well, it's not loud enough. It's fucking loud. It's not loud enough. We all stand around in amazement. I mean, he's just spent like 10 grand on the biggest hi-fi fucking, control room sound that you can imagine. He says, "Not loud enough." So then they're all scratching their heads. But basically what happened was Eddie Veal and a guy called Stephen Court got together. They looked at this opening, 2 openings, which was surrounded by concrete. So the idea was we're going to have to put more speakers in there, but we can't make the opening bigger without using a thermal lance or something to melt the concrete. I don't know. Anyway, they measured it, and apparently they could just about get, instead of 1 15-inch, 2 15-inch speakers.
Yeah.
So then they devised this fucking plan to double the size of the monitors, 2 15-inch speakers in either side. They're going to tri-amp or whatever it was, doubling the amp capacity, and now it was fucking loud. And it had no relation on human beings at all. It was just fucking ridiculous. So, because Gus's idea was that he wanted to hear every frequency coming out of the instrument. So if it was a bass drum, he wanted to hear the very high frequencies it was producing to the very, very lowest, so that he could then twiddle and fiddle with it and get rid of them. So that was why. So the monitors actually were the opposite of flat. They were extremely low end, heavy.
Right.
So basically, people used to come in, and when we'd finish a track, you've never heard a sound like it. I mean, it was phenomenal.
I bet it was.
I mean, you could feel it as much as hear it. It's like listening to a live band, through a massive hi-fi system. The thing is, it never sounded like that anywhere else. So people actually used to get rather pissed off. They'd play it on their fucking transistor radio or something, and they go, "Doesn't sound like that at the mill." Well, of course it fucking doesn't, because we've got fucking great big speakers at the mill. And that was in the days when, if you wanted to appreciate great sound, you had to have a fucking enormous system to play it back on. Yeah. And that's gone out the window now, really.
That's what I find amazing with music these days. I mean, we've got the technology to make it sound fantastic.
Backwards.
And people listen to MP3.
I do mixes now, and I try and make sure they sound fucking big. And then someone will ring up and say, "I can't hear the bass." I said, "Well, oh yeah, well, what'd you play it on?" "Well, my phone." So now I find myself listening to my own mixes on a fucking phone. "Oh, I can't hear the bass." Turn it up.
That's one of the hardest things, though, isn't it? Getting it to sound good on everything, especially the bass.
Gus, in his meticulousness, had our maintenance guy build a transmitter so that you could go out into the car park, turn your radio on in the car, and hear the mix that was playing in the...
I've heard that story. Yeah. Yeah, well, interestingly, I quite often judge my mixes in the car. And if it doesn't sound good in the car, I think,
Yeah, I've got a problem with someone over that. We've done 6 albums. It's a religious album. Philip, his name. He's got some fucking amazing cars, but he doesn't have a hi-fi in the house. He listens to it in the car. Now, the only thing with listening to stuff in the car is it will tend to be very low-endy.
Yeah.
So if you've got, to be honest, getting the sound right for a car and it to sound right on there is impossible. Because if you've got enough bass where you can hear it on there, it's going to be too loud. Anyway, so it's a bit of a juggling. All right, admittedly, one way or another, it should be possible to do.
Yeah.
I've got my favourite way of listening to my mixes after I don't even bother too much about the stereo. I mean, it's all up here. I sort of do it. So I listen on headphones. I've got a great pair of Sony headphones. They're not a lot of top end, but I like to listen when I finish the mix. If it sounds good in there, I I know it's good when it comes out of there, but basically, obviously, what's happened is the equipment has gone from the only way you get to do it is by booking a recording studio to everyone's got a studio on their wristwatch, or which to some extent is great, and to some extent it's not, because to some extent a lot of those people oughtn't to be trying to be engineers. They should stick to being artists. I always say, do what you do best. If you can got a fucking great voice, will be a great singer, like Paul Rodgers. If you can play guitar, be a great guitarist. But a lot of people want to do it all, especially the girls, the women. They want to be the singer, the songwriter, the engineer, the producer, don't want anyone else doing anything. So they spend the next rest of their lives trying to come up with something in their room.
I mean, it's a craft in itself, isn't it?
It's a total craft, and also I always say making music was something that was done by teams of people. And that's where, they used to call those bands as well, some pretty good teams there, And now everyone wants to do it all themselves, and very few people like we know that in history that have managed to do that. Stevie Wonder or even Michael Jackson had a producer, but there's not many artists that have been able to be great producers, great this, great that.
That's right. Paul McCartney has done a bit of that as well.
But even McCartney was, I think most people would agree, he was better when he was with John, so what a team, what an amazing team.
Brilliant team.
Incredible team.
Well, Stuart, it's been fascinating talking to you. Absolutely amazing. Great stories. I mean, we've run out of time, but we could just go on and on.
We can, and we did.
But
we will in the future. And it's been very nice talking to you, and it's all good stuff.
I've still got a pile of questions, but that's been great. I appreciate it very much.
No problem.
Thanks a lot.
We should meet again.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to the Rockface Podcast.